We're here to talk smarter strategies for working with real-world data. In a world where I think consistently today we have heard people say the words data, of course, healthcare, AI, time and time again. But in a plethora of data, how do you actually make it actionable? How do you make it fit these use cases? How do you make it meaningful? And how do you change care? And so this is a couple of topics that we're going to be talking about today. I'm Sarah Pesco. I'm the Director of Product Management for Real World Data. And with me, I have three fantastic panelists. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. Ed Barnett. I'm the Senior VP at Inovalon over our Insights group. Spent 30 years of my career on the pharmaceutical side, commercializing drugs, and in the last 6.5 years, selling data back into healthcare companies.
Hi, thanks for sticking around through to the end.
Yeah.
So my name's Eric Barrett. I'm Vice President of Health Economics, Outcomes Research, and Market Access Analytics at Medtronic. My background is in economics.
And hi, everybody. My name's Patrick Kowalik. I'm with Snowflake. I'm on our industry team. I support our healthcare life sciences practice. Been here about 4 years, and before that, my whole life has been in healthcare through data. 10 years before Snowflake, especially running operations and analytics for a major payer. And anyway, thanks. Yeah, agreed. Thanks for sticking around. You guys should all get a gold star.
Yeah, thank you for attending. I know it's been a great couple of days of conference. So, of course, at the end, we will have question and answer. So please feel free to utilize this panel's expertise. So moving into the discussion, not even 5 years, when we look back even over a decade, Ed, we've seen the real-world data environment has changed. Can you tell us a little bit about what that change has looked like and how has strategy adapted in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. If you think about healthcare data, we're still a young industry. Back before 1990, you had to go through the papers to try to find the information, put it together. It was 1990 that we first saw physician-level data come to the market, right? And a couple of years went by, and in 2002, you saw patient-level data be introduced into the market, which is great. And you saw a couple of years go by, and the HITECH Act of 2009 actually was a major change where it incentivized health organizations to put their data on platform EHR records, right? So, that played a role in about 2015, you had 80% of the organizations having data. And so now you had a lot of data where you had the ability to put technology to it and get access to it in a more efficient way. And then what you see the last 10 years, and that's why I said the industry is still young. The last 10 years, there's been such an explosion in data. If you think about lab data coming to market around 2018, you see registry data coming to market, biomarker genetics data is now being integrated. On the marketing side, you see exposure data. And then, of course, the wearables. Everybody's looking to wearables. So just an explosion in all this data over the last few years has been awesome for researchers. But it also poses another question is, hey, how do we take this data? How do we figure out what the right data sets are to use? And then the second thing I think that has really played a role, mainly probably the last 7 years, is the industry's ability to integrate data. And so if you think about the last couple of years, more and more companies have come to market where they're able to tokenize the data, right, and de-identify it. More and more of the companies have come to market where they're able to do it in a more efficient, quicker way. Because when you're putting data sets together, you also have to do the privacy search to make sure, they're right for the use cases. And so, just 4 years ago, when you started to put data together, it would take 4, 6, 8, 10 months. Today in the marketplace, we have companies that can do that within days. So when I look at where the industry has come is, yes, there's been an explosion in the amount of data, but also the ability to put it together hasn't improved. And that's why I think we call this a strategy, because today you have to think about just not the data assets, but how am I going to put it together to give me that super asset that I'm going to answer my questions with. So that's just a quick history that I was fortunate enough to live through.
I feel like I just could sit through a TED Talk with you just giving me the whole history of real world data and how all of that's changing.
But it's exciting. We heard a couple of talks ago that it's going to continue to explode, and there's going to be more and more data. And so when you think about how to answer your research questions, you do have to understand how each different data asset can answer that question. Because when you put stuff together, there's going to be trade-offs you have to make.
Actually, that's a really great segue, thinking about fit for purpose. So, Eric, when you're looking at data and when you're evaluating that data to really answer some of the questions that you're looking at, what are you really looking to evaluate, and maybe even talk about maybe a couple of examples?
Sure. So, I'll preface all of this with I'm not a fan of the term fit for purpose, which has kind of been come up through the real world data space, because ultimately you start with the question. You're not starting with the data set, and I think then once you know what your question is, you can figure out if that data exists. And so I think from that standpoint, we're not thinking about a particular aspect the data needs to have X number of observations or a certain particular measurement, just because we say, we want to be able to study clinical outcomes, and clinical outcomes in blood pressure or hypertension require blood pressure. Clinical outcomes in some sort of infection will require data about rehospitalization. And so it is all about making trade-offs and saying, well, we can probably answer this variety of questions. In terms of utilization, we know we can use claims data. In terms of we need clinical measures or potentially notes, we might need EHR data. And so what we're looking for is, I think of it, we're trying to optimize across the data sets to be able to do as much as possible without having to buy everything. And ultimately, you could buy everything and still not be able to answer some questions, because some questions will never have a fit for purpose data set. They just won't exist. So what it means to us is thinking about identifying the priority questions, and then what data sources do we need or can we combine to answer those questions.
And Patrick, hearing Eric talk a little bit, what I'm hearing is, you're probably going to have to do some stacking, linking, combining some of these kind of things. Where does a really great technological backbone kind of come into that for helping create these data sets to answer these questions?
To just be direct, it makes it possible, finally. I hope if you picked up on themes throughout today, no one who presented or talked in the hallway said, I don't need more data. So, how do you get to that? How do you interrogate a platform that can hold an EMR record, a claim, an audio file, an image, my wearables, my CGM data, like that, to the point of this explosion of RWD not having any limit. And that goes from source to format to structure to standard to how identified. So, as a technologist, a platform that just says, hey, you no longer have to have this 6-burner stove of where do I interrogate certain data by either type or by category or by mode, and then figure out how to MacGyver it together. And then guess what? Once you've done that, it's gone, or you have to repeat it every time. To the beauty of some of the stories you're talking about is technology can now bring it all together and help you go with speed. So I can figure out, same thing, even just the explosion of just knowing, hey, there's dimensions of data that aren't what I've always used to figure out if it's fit for purpose. How do I get different beacons and different indicators to say, hey, should I go deeper? So I don't have to buy it all, but give me a teaser that says, is there interest there? So some of that as a technologist is just, there is no limit anymore to either how fast you can get an insight to figure out, am I 80-20 going to have value with this, or should I pivot? That's to me the beauty I see. And that is so different than, to your opening remark of, 10 to 20 X years ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, gentlemen, a question. So I keep hearing words like regulatory grade, research grade. Okay. And I want to know, what does this mean to you? Do these have real meanings? Because, we've seen some FDA blog posts in 2023, but a post is different than guidelines. Is this marketing? What does words like regulatory grade and research grade mean to you when you hear someone like me at the front of this panel asking that question?
I'll start because I feel about the same way about regulatory grade as I do fit for purpose. And I have a ton of respect for the FDA and European regulators, and but the idea that data meets a certain standard, I think, should be true no matter what the purpose is. So whether it's for a publication or for a regulatory submission. And this is completely my hypothesis, is that regulatory grade came out of the idea that there's like a way to validate it and go back and check the source. And so if you see something weird, you could go back to the chart and say, oh yeah, that's not right. But with all the ways the data is coming in now, like you're never going to go back to someone who had a wearable and say, were you actually running when you saw this spike, or did your dog run through carrying the what, right? So so I think the data doesn't. Regulatory grade data is less of an issue, and being able to understand and explain the abnormalities, but then use it to gain insight. You should be able to use it for a regulatory purpose, and that means being very thoughtful and careful about what you're working with.
I mean, I think there's been some companies using that marketing term to try to sell data, but I think in the end, it's how can I get the most accurate data for me to answer my research questions. And for those of you that use a lot of data, data is not clean when it starts. There's got to be a lot of curating and cleaning to get there. There's a lot of duplication in data today in the marketplace. And so I think certain companies have focused on cleaning it to try to get it as accurate as possible, so that when you're trying to generate evidence from it, you have the best possible data out there. So I think that's kind of what I look at as regulatory grade is can I get the best, most accurate data possible?
I mean, in kind of along those same talk tracks, I think we've gone too many minutes without saying AI. So it's about time that I actually say it. So AI, there's a lot there. There's opportunity, there's hype. We keep talking about here AI from the perspective of building these workflows, but also thinking about it from the perspective of cleaning the data, even before you apply it to some of your models, right? It can be part of that process and some of the more back-end data structuring things. So Patrick, tell me a little bit about how you're seeing different groups utilize AI, not just from the solving clinical decision workflows, but cleaning the data to then run the models that then use the AI to do those clinical decision workflows.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess just first of all, just the slide made me smile because if anyone here still thinks it's just hype, you're probably at the wrong conference. But it is fair to have. You should have a balance of opportunity versus hype versus like where do I stick? Like always have a balance, but find an opportunist in your life who wants to talk to you about what AI can do, because the ability to have, it's not just asking a question and getting that answer, but it's from extraction to preparation to cleansing to dynamic security or building your semantic layer. Like the power of AI is really built on the data it has and the semantics of how myself versus Eric talk to the data to be able to find those discoverable elements. So it is by all means an opportunity, and is just speed to value, speed to insights. This is the pattern you've heard all day today, or even just in the last 10 minutes here. I no longer have to, read an abstract or read a document or review an assessment or look at a survey. I can get those insights, and that is where it is absolutely an opportunity. The most popular coding language in the world today is not, Java or SQL anymore. It's English. And so for me to be able to interrogate a whole, not just my blue button record, but a population set to say, tell me some patterns that I'm not. Like the beauty of being able, like we have all been in the industry decades, we've talked about it. It's pretty amazing at how linear you get or myopic you get and how you've always interrogated problems. That is like my friendly smile of what AI has done is it can look at data to say, did you ever notice this pattern? Or here's here's an alternative action. And to be able to say, to that new analyst who joins and says, why do we always do it like this? That's my favorite part of the AI hype or the AI opportunity is to think differently at the point of the data, not waiting, for iteration 2, iteration 3 that might even take a week or 2 weeks per result. So anyway, that's where, like, if you're not exploring what's possible to either ask a question of an audio file in real time, merging it to your structured data, or to find cohorts of patterns between all your clinical studies to say, just curious, what was the common eye color? What was the common cohort? What was the common, where did I collect this all from? Those things are at the point of immediate use. And again, you'll use those as beacons to get into where do I go deeper? Where do I go next? So some of that, fun exploration is, I hope that's why you guys are here, because you're like, I didn't know AI could get me that. All I know is the ChatGPT to get a recipe for, better spaghetti. How do you interrogate a DICOM image, a clinical record? How do I stitch it together? And also just how do I protect it dynamically? Because you also AI should never be a secret door to get, to an answer or to get to a person's record. The same protection you have at structured data, at BI, at AI, it's all got to be, common and governed to the point of regulatory grade. I can see the full lineage, but it's also safe and secure. So some of those, I hope that's what you guys are picking up on, is how fast you can get discoverability and insights.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt speed is critical. One of the things I think about is what could have been. Think about all the drugs that missed their primary endpoint, and you hear the stories where they had these 2 patients should have been in there. Somehow they got through the exclusion criteria. Lots of drugs not being approved. That today with AI and using real world data could have seen what does that baseline, AE look like, and not stop trials and keep some products going that in the end could have helped some patients. So I think you're going to see AI really accelerate clinical trials, making sure the right patients are getting in and getting good results. So there's a lot of great places, but that's one of the places I look to when I think it's going to have a major impact.
Yeah. If you also think too about the amount of data that's been archived or put on that back burner, are you still looking at all that? But today, I mean, I could run AI behind the scenes just to say, pull me out any call that had an adverse, condition without having to listen to all of them and just say, what did I miss? Because if it wasn't keyed in, from a 30-minute voicemail or an archive or a transcription, you can discover that. You can go back and even find things, in a matter of, minutes, hours that just, have been archived. To your point of what did I miss when I had that? I think that's also really powerful, is you've seen this cutover of what are you doing from today's data collection to the future, but also the folks that are saying, let me look back at the last couple of years and just what did I miss? Because if you didn't key it in, it was probably missed. And then to the point of, you asked about a technology platform, why does that matter? Storage is just easy now. I don't have to archive it to the point where it takes 10 codes to get to. I can get to it quickly. So I like those are big. Looking back, looking forward, pivoting it all together.
So hearing that, I hear so many different elements as a data person and data platform person about past data as well as future data that you could bring in. How is, as you're seeing groups start to think about AI anywhere along their workflow, is this driving their data strategy? Are they even thinking about their data strategy, their data platform, what they're going to need to be able to then unlock these next things with AI?
What do you want to start?
I mean, Eric, let's start with you. Let's tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about it in your realm when you're starting to think about maybe applying AI to your data strategy.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's driving any of our investments, data investments, but it is definitely front of mind, and it's a tool. It's a very powerful tool, and so we want to be able to use it to its fullest potential. So, it has played into our planning in terms of where the data is stored and what software and features we have to layer on top of the data to use. Because I don't want to have a whole bunch of data in an environment where we can't leverage AI or machine learning or any related tools and say, oh well, if only we had put it in a different cloud somewhere else, we could have done more. Yeah. So it's featured in the planning, but it's not. I'm not investing in a different data set because AI exists. We still have our priority projects that we're focused on.
Yeah, you're thinking a lot more about the architecture that's going to allow it versus just buying the tool or.
I'm coming at it from a research standpoint, thinking reimbursement related things, somewhat clinical regulatory side of things. From an R&D perspective, they've got a very different perspective. They probably are thinking AI first, data second, because they're product development. So different use cases, different strategies.
But still conversations that need to be had across the continuum to make sure that we're leveraging it appropriately. So thinking a little bit more around building these sustainable data strategies, we've seen some loss of data in the industry. We talked about, not all data we think is available out there. So, Eric, with many vendors and many sources kind of repackaging, and how do you know what you're really buying? Like at the end of the day, right? The way we're transforming, re-giving it to you.
We spend a lot of time with data vendors to the point where like I'm almost sure they're going to walk away from the table before we do. Just trying to like we go with question after question and try with feasibility, like sample sizes, trying to get as much information about the source as possible. And sometimes they say, oh, well, we'll buy it, but we can't disclose the source. But then I'm like, okay, well, what years do you have? How many people? What types of payers? What is, show me a sample of what it looks like. Because there are a ton of data vendors. There's a very few amount of data sources. And so everyone's trying to sell you something. And then lots of people layer in their own proprietary, I don't know, magic sprinkles. And they're like, our data is so much better than that person over there. And like, but I know for a fact it's the same data, but you did something to it. And unless you can undo it, I don't know if I want it because I don't know actually what you did to it. And so I think we spend a lot of time trying to work through and understand like, what are you actually giving us for the money? That's how we do it.
And Patrick, I think that also can come back to some of the architecture and tools available that are out there that help when someone like Eric is asking vendors and sources all these questions. We need to be able to have a way that those can be answered and that there is greater transparency and methodology. How can some of the tools enable or help those conversations to run a little bit smoother?
I'm trying to figure out how to say it. It's a nice balance as an eternal optimist with a little bit of a pessimist on data. If I'm looking to explain an RWD set I'm looking at, or for me it's an operational data set, whatever adjective I want to call it, that's my favorite part of AI. I instantly can show you the lineage of how did I pull together this, and where did I enrich, where did I collect first party versus where did I derive versus where did I. So like to me, I think some of those kind of augment, because I mean, to the point of like, limited sources and multiple vendors, I agree, but the other side is also real. Like to go after even social media chatter or to go after, wearables and IoT, there are still so many other data sets that haven't been acquired to the point where they're into those channels where they've been stitched together. So anyway, the opportunity of just what else can I get from from whatever, a person or a cohort is there. But I mean, you can see it, and now you have technology and AI that can go after. I mean, whether it's a Reddit thread or even a Facebook group, it's no longer just for ranting. It's and again, sometimes you discover some of these when either it enters your own life or you have a family member or a friend who's dealing with cancer and he's discovering like just different things that work with treatment. People are sharing their stories, their journeys, their insights of, hey, my clinical trial or my care plan was defined as X, but I took this pivot and I got this result. And maybe it's to deal with a symptom versus the core, but that type of insight is available now. And that's where, like, I hope it's not just harnessing all the kind of like the core, pack of RWD, but it's like, how do I extend further to get these just insights that were never really talked about, or they were just talked about like privately. Like, so that opportunity to open up, like they're fair game. And it's amazing what you can find that, again, I don't mean to use that immediately into an RWE. You use that as a beacon to say, I got to go deeper, and who can collect that data on that study, with that type of cohort, and it'll be there.
Well, with seeing some of the open data or people building things off of those models and then seeing some of that data maybe leave and not be available anymore, Ed, how are people filling some of the gaps out there as we've seen some of the churn over recent years and months?
Yeah, so I'll just, let me say, so I've worked for 2 of the 4 top data providers in the industry. And, for everyone here, as you're thinking about your strategy, I would definitely talk to everybody because nobody has all the data. You need to understand what comes with the data because there's are trade-offs where you may be able to get some data, but you're not getting MPI numbers or you're not getting financials you might need. So it's important you understand what each provider has. And then part of it is, again, can you build a strategy to get all the pieces you need? So last year, if you were looking at data in the industry, on the open claims data, there was a breach in the marketplace. And that was with Change Health. And they literally stopped providing data to the market. And then later in August, they came back. But what you saw in the industry is you saw about 25% of all open claims disappear. And the question is, well, where did it go? And there's two places that it went. Number one, there are data processors, claims processors that won't sell their data to folks. So you lose about 20% of the market there. Then also physicians have the ability to go directly to payers for reimbursement. And we think a lot more physicians went over there. But at the end, if you're looking at your data this year versus last year, you're seeing 25% less open claims than you did last year in the market. So what companies have done to try to fill that gap is, where can you go? So obviously closed claims is great. It's a lot more information in closed claims, but the trade-off is closed claims is delayed 90 days. You have EHR data. EHR data gives you a lot more depth, and depending on what you're doing, people are grabbing that to add to it. So people are starting to grab, and even lab data, you can pull in lab data. People don't realize, and you could improve visibility with labs. So what a lot of the companies have done from a strategic perspective is they have their foundational data set and they look for the other assets that can give them incremental visibility to the market, whether at a patient level or physician level. So that's where a lot of these new data assets are becoming important, because people want to see more visibility to market that's been lost. So I hope that helps.
So given all these things out there that we're talking about, that we're considering from a data architecture perspective, in all your different opinions, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that we're seeing groups fall into, whether from a technology perspective, whether from a utilization perspective, or even from a sourcing perspective? And, Eric, I'll start out with you because I think you started around last time. So what are you seeing out there?
I think, two things. I think one pitfall is people get data and they don't know exactly what it is. So they say, oh, we've got claims data, it counts. And I'm like, okay, are you counting the code? Are you counting the person? Are you counting the claim? Are you counting claim ID or like claim day encounter?
Yeah.
And then I hear, oh, I don't know. Like they could be 5 times different.
Yeah.
And so what are you measuring? And so one thing is just that understand what it is. The other thing is I think that there's really an interest in, more data faster always seems like a good idea, but it doesn't always help because it keeps coming in and you can process it faster with AI. But again, like what are you looking for? If you're trying to measure something and you have a sample and then you add new people to it and maybe there's been some denials and stuff comes out, now you have a slightly different measure, like your measurement keeps changing. So from a research perspective, like, your estimate is bouncing around, your confidence interval is all over the place. Like that's not a measure. That's just, noise. So I'd say keep those 2 things in mind.
I liked your answer on because the semantics matter so much. And that's my favorite part of AI is how much people are starting to finally talk about the way I ask a question, you ask a question. We said the same words and we mean it totally different. So as a pitfall there, that one, I can only hope AI will help clean that up because at least it'll play back, hey, based on your question, this is how I answered versus just you deliver it and somebody runs. Just to pile on, I think the biggest silo, that I see as I help, organizations collect and use all their data, just the silos are still just, they're just everywhere. In fact, where even the same organization buys the same data set 3 or 4 times across, within the same wall. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And it could have been sold as, 2 different names, same data. So I think being able to actually have empirical data to know when was it this record or this medical record or this chart or this physician note is there. Because again, that could influence counts. It could influence, how acute your scenario is. If you don't know that it was matched to the person, it looks like, hey, I had 2 instances. It was really only 1. So I think the data silos and keeping them siloed and not embracing some of that technology to stitch it together, because if he keeps it by department or by use case, you're just perpetuating the problem. So pitfalls, data silos are just, my nightmare.
Yeah. I'll leave you with 2 pitfalls. So probably the first one is, and it goes along lines, people sourcing data from different companies and it's the same data, right?
Yeah.
So you have to ask and think about what is incremental, ask for sample data, stack it and see what is actually incremental. And you'll be surprised that there's not a lot because everybody's selling the same open claims data out there. The second thing is around diagnosis. How many patients are diagnosed with this? It's not an official diagnosis. When doctors are submitting the claim, it's a presumed. They think it could be a diagnosis. So, there's always going to be a higher percent of number of patients diagnosed than actually were diagnosed with that disease. So it's always good to run a scenario where we're saying, show me those patients that have that diagnosis twice. Will help you get to a more accurate, perception of how many patients really have the disease.
So I'm hearing a lot of, we're buying the same thing a couple of different times, really look at and think about that. Is that where you look at and you start to think about technologies like clean rooms, or really how you can kind of get some, like, Patrick, tell me a little bit about how, there's technologies out there that can help you with those kind of efforts when you're thinking, is this the same thing I already have?
Well, there are a lot. And again, the more you kind of de-identify a record set, the more you're at risk of, am I being redundant? So those opportunities on whether I tokenize and I still get kind of like that master key, or I do get to a point where I have an EMPI, a master, person identifier, whether it's, my true identifier or at least just the record. Data clean rooms, you bring up a great opportunity there. That's a great way for two partners who haven't worked together to start to say, hey, how much do we overlap? Is there an investment opportunity here to say, because everybody will tell you, hey, I have all your patients, I have all your members, and you start to match up, and you're like, well, no, we have, not in this part of Texas or not in this line of business. So to be able to explore through a clean room, and for the folks in the room who don't know, it's like instead of just Eric and I sharing our whole data set and letting a contract say, hey, if it doesn't match, just delete it, and we'll be okay. It's starting smaller. It's saying, hey, put it into a common safe room, and where we have overlap, only the overlap gets exposed. And you can start small with, hey, what's a count where we overlap? And then we're like, oh, we're over 80%. Let's go deeper until I get down, to a cohort, to a geography, or to a patient population. And then, the records come out there. So some of those are ways that when you're trying to figure out, hey, where is a vendor, where is a third-party collector, it's a good exercise and it's safe, controlled, and then you can open up the whole caboodle for, give me the person level info.
All right, so before we move on to our Q&A section, so start thinking about your questions. I'm going to start with Ed, and I'll move on over. So thinking about of all this, we did some pitfalls, so we need to end with a warm and fuzzy. What is making you hopeful? What are you excited about when you're thinking about tomorrow? Or if you can't do a warm fuzzy, what's a piece of advice that you would give, Ed?
I'm just thinking about AI. So I'm brainwashed. AI.
Yeah.
No, it's I think that, just what I think about is going back to understanding what each different data set can bring to the table for me, and can I put it together in the right way that can answer my questions? That's what I keep thinking about. And we're going to have new data sets and be understand disease progression better than we ever have before. And so those are the things that I think that I'm excited about.
Eric?
I think where we started, just the ability, all of this data that exists, the redundant vendors notwithstanding, but there's like all of these different types of data sources and the ability to process them efficiently and quickly. There's just tons of really interesting stuff we're going to be able to do, and more every day.
Patrick, ever the optimist?
Yeah, well, I've talked data in healthcare my whole life, and when you reach your own personal event, you realize how much more important it is to, I use this track to tell your story once. When I even left an endoscopy and I got, fluid in my lungs, and I went to the same ER, and I had to I just was next door. How do you not know this would happen? So whether it's your own care plan, a clinical study, research, to be able to stitch together that story that really says, it's care interoperability is why I keep trying to be an optimist. Because, then you have kids, you have, your parents, you have to not have to repeat your story, and to actually truly have that blue button of just who is Patrick or who is the population that I fit into is what we're all hoping for.
Yeah.
It's funny because I was thinking about this question, and even I myself had a totally different answer before this conference. I was originally thinking, this is going to help for people that it might have taken them 10 years to get diagnosed or getting diagnosed. Whereas really, and that is something I'm still incredibly excited for, but as I'm hearing all the speakers, as I'm talking to people out there in the atrium, what I'm really hearing is people are seeing the importance of data. So I think my warm and fuzzies actually changed. And I'm hoping now that more and more people that are generating data and people are having data are more open to allowing it to be part of the real world data continuum.
Yeah.
Because for people to be able to access and run these amazing studies and build and tune these amazing models, we need people to allow their data to be available to drive all this innovation. And so I know it's kind of funny that it's in 2 days my entire, warm and fuzzy switched, but I hope that we're seeing how important it is when people participate in the real world data space. So that's my warm and fuzzy. So going on to question and answers, do we have any questions from the audience? A microphone will be coming your way.
Thank you. I enjoyed the commentary, essentially just discussing like when you're comparing apples to apples with different data vendors. For, I guess, more targeted to you as a cloud compute question, when comparing different cloud vendors in terms of your capabilities, you talk about data clean rooms, some of the processing. As someone who's switched through lots of cloud providers, moving through academia to industry, the capability shift, right, year to year and from provider to provider, where do you see the landscape? Where are the big differentiators, maybe for Snowflake, but more broadly as well?
The differentiators across cloud vendors embrace the fact that they all are never sitting still. That's probably the scale of a cloud vendor excitement, or again, the eternal optimist versus an on-prem. That you just recognize. I think the easiest answer, and again, first of all, for Snowflake, we love all the cloud vendors. That's how we run. We run on all 3 major cloud vendors because your data can't be isolated just one spot. So you expect the same performance, data security, portability of your data. If you're exploring kind of the data platform and the data access for AI, think about that too. So you have, you can control residency, business continuity, disaster recovery across cloud. So, just the takeaway is, you build your pros and cons list. What's important to you? Where do I have to control it? How do I want to secure it? The volume, the type of data. And, you'll not try to do an evaluation in 2 minutes on the fly, but you'll start to see how they rise up. And then, where is your ecosystem? Where's their main CSP? So, great question, and I hope everybody explores it, and then never, sit still. Keep exploring, figuring out why, you need to, evolve. But to that point or to the room, data is global. So to the point, I think also where you're going with multi-cloud is it's no longer just your community or the data you have firsthand. You have the ability to evaluate a study in Australia against a study in Iowa. That data could be there in a snap of a finger, and that's the power of cloud with data residency and control.
Any other questions out there? We keep talking about AI, so I think that there might be some additional data questions out there, because how else are you going to tune your models?
A lot of times, if we talk about data, we talk about, and specifically from a context of real world, we talk about structured data to a most part, right? How did we look at from a client perspective? How did we look at the clinical data? What do you think is the role of unstructured data, right? To me, I'm a strong believer that we now have capability that has, that you can process unstructured data at the pace that we process structured data today, right? But what is from a demand signal perspective? Do you see value from a real world evidence perspective, tapping into unstructured data? Can you explore that topic a little bit?
Yeah, I'll start. So I've seen a lot of different companies use it. One good example is disease progression. So that doesn't show up in claims or anywhere else, but I could see somebody who's going on a weight loss drug. I could look into the clinical notes. I can run NLP and say, hey, find me these patients. Let me see if they're progressing. Same thing with cancer patients. So I think you're going to start to see a lot more companies go down that road, because it's giving us a lot more depth of information about the patients we've never had before in claims, in pharmacy data. So it's almost like a missing piece. And I think right now in the last, I would say 12 to 18 months, a lot of companies now are discovering the value of that. The challenge was it wasn't de-identified, and there was a lot of privacy risk. Just in the last year, multiple companies have come to the market with, products that have been de-identified, and you can get access to all that. So I think you're going to see leaps and bounds, with connecting it back to claims in the next, I would say, 12 months.
I'll add, it's been hugely valuable for the device industry too, because unlike pharma, where you can see NDC codes or something. Some devices are coded at a class level. And so if you go into the notes, you can see, does it say Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, Johnson & Johnson, whatever. The other thing that we've been looking into is what else comes out of the notes. There's things like you can see a little bit more into the discussions that a physician and a patient have and say, like, were they offered a treatment and then they turned it down, or were they never offered the treatment? And what does that mean in terms of the care pathway that follows from there? So I think there's a ton of real world data that can be pulled out of the unstructured notes and really contribute to real world evidence overall.
So I do compliance too where I'm at. So I wear multiple hats. I work for a Native American tribe, so you wear multiple hats. So on the compliance side, with all the AI, how's that going to look for like policy and security for cybersecurity with that AI and being able to dive in and work across multiple platforms? And I'm just thinking of how, if we're doing all of that, how am I going to write a policy and how am I going to make sure that our data is secure? And because there's breaches that are happening all the time. And so, like, do you feel like the AI is going to increase that risk for security breaches, or is it still at that same level that we're constantly dealing with in healthcare, or in general that we're always constantly dealing with?
Patrick, we were talking about this a little bit, about your perspective of how you actually view AI as a way to keep things secure and some of the platforms as a way to keep things secure. Do you want to maybe talk about this a little?
Yeah, the eternal optimist.
Yeah.
AI has an interesting context in the market where hallucinations and things are said. But from a compliance perspective, I still engage regularly with my chief compliance officer, trying to encourage her on how to use AI to augment what's classified as PHI and PII. Because again, old school used to be very manual. You'd know by the data column, the data type, hey, this needs to be classified. The discoverability of just when I'm extracting pages of physician notes that come out, how do you map that into a catalog that says now you got to protect this? Or also just the shift too from a compliance perspective with AI is running AI, bringing your applications, your people to the data to where it is governed, where it's got role control and data protections, data security, tokenization, rather than just pumping your data over to somewhere where you're exploring AI. Like that's what should really raise the compliance flags, is the movement of data. So to have your frameworks and controls to know. But I can use AI to say, to look at where have you tested the fences from a cybersecurity perspective, or just who's trying to get access to data. Like somebody keeps saying 10 different ways to say, tell me about Eric's, clinical case. I could raise a flag instantly and I wouldn't have had any clue. I wouldn't have known unless somebody told me in the hallway at a water cooler. So AI has a lot of different flavors of what it can open up to. And that's why keep asking those questions. Because if you don't know that that's there, if that's a takeaway back to your team when you get home, be like, hey, have we thought about using AI the other way to just watch kind of what's going on and protecting it? The opportunity's there.
So I can hear, I think lunch is being set up. I think I think I'm preventing everybody from eating, and nobody likes that. So I will say thank you so much. We started out kind of just talking about data, and we ended up going into so many different topics, even around security. We would love to continue this conversation. We would love to hear from you. We have a couple of different ways to contact us up on this screen. And of course, thank you to my panelists. Thank you all for attending, and let's eat.